possible to kind of move, thank you, to move the disabling workplace to an enabling one. And that involved all sorts of different kind of stakeholder engagements and so on. And I was also partly involved in the Flexible Fund, which is the focus of today's session. So I'm very excited to hear the presentations from our speakers today. The Flexible Fund had 3 rounds of funding across the last few years, looking at different areas of focus. We're going to hear about them today. They funded 13 projects, 6 of which have been completed, and 7 will be wrapped up by Easter next year. And I'm going to pop the link to the EDICa website where you can see which projects have been funded, so you can kind of dig into some of the information there. Today we have, as I say, you can see the speakers on the screen there. I think that's 5 speakers. Each will be speaking for 5 minutes, really kind of whistle-stop tour of their projects and what are the kind of practical implications of their work, which I'm really looking forward to. I'll be chairing, and there'll be a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A as we go, and at the end I'll pick them out, and hopefully we'll also be able to hear from anyone who has questions. You can kind of maybe get your mic on. Thank you. Hopefully this Zoom will go. Zoom will go well. Often a lot of us are used to Teams, but we'll see. Hopefully we've got Lizzie on the technical side, so we're in good hands. I am going to hand over to our first speaker. Oh, sorry. I should say this session does not have BSL support. The other sessions within today's event do. For example, in the main room, but this one does not. So that's something to be aware of. If you do require closed captions, you can actually put them on in your Zooms. I think at the bottom there, you'll be able to see kind of show captions button. So if you do need captions, please put them on. Yes, please see the link in the chat for some of our Flexible Fund posters. Lizzie just popped them in there. For those in person, please take some time in the break to go see them in the physical posters in the room itself, if you are there in person. Okay, next slide. Great. We're going to move on to Hadar Elraz. Hadar, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and then kick off with our first presentation. I'll keep time and looking forward to it. Thank you.
So, hi, good morning, everybody. Nice to virtually meet you all. My name is Hadar Elraz, and I led on a project titled Gender and Mental Health Conditions in UK Higher Education, Reorganizing Inclusion in Contemporary Academia, or attempting to, I shall say. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the project really investigated how institutional structures, cultural expectations, and workload distributions contribute to mental health challenges and how these intersect with broader issues of equalities and workplace inclusion. So what we did, the focus was on those identified women academics. And we've carried out 60 semi-structured interviews. Each interview lasted 1 hour minimum long. And on top of that, we also carried out 6 focus groups and additional 6 follow-up interviews with HR, equality managers, national policymakers, and ref leads, so institutional ref leads. And we really wanted to find out what were the experiences of, well, number one, with the interviews of those identified women academics in the contemporary academia. And we also wanted to find out not only about their work experiences, but we equally wanted to find out about their mental health. Now, you might be questioning yourself if the participant had a diagnosed condition or not. So just to preempt the, perhaps emerging questions there, then by far and large, 95% of our participants did have a mental health condition. However, it wasn't something that we specifically asked for in the call. We wanted people who were willing to come forward and were willing to talk about their mental health. Now, the findings are way too complex to kind of like to cover in a couple of minutes, but I'll do my very best. And you can see here on the slide that the key ones are highlighted. So let's try and unpack these. And really, before I try and unpack these very quickly, I will say that by far and large, you can see, I stated here, invisible workforce doing invisible labor, because that was a trend that came throughout the findings. So let's see how that came about. So first of all, there was this recognition around workload inequalities, and it wasn't necessarily visible workload inequality. In many instances, there's pastoral and administrative and emotionally tasking roles, which were assigned to or ended up taken by those identified women academic, something that exacerbated their mental health. There are career progression barriers, and there were also institutional support gaps in terms of supporting academics' mental health, especially those who are dealing with students, and in many instances, their own mental health, students' mental health. There's also the recognition that rather than addressing issues at a structural level, so the problem obviously is kind of like in many instances is structural. It is overwork, redundancies, insufficient number of employees, etc. There was a recognition that the responsibility is being thrown back into the individual. And ideal worker norms, which basically, expect an academic to be available 24/7 to their work and to perform unfettered by any other non-work conditions. That was something that felt was a factor in excluding employees who had experiences of mental health and more. And really, it's the accumulated effect of intersectionality. So being a woman, having mental health experiences. In many instances, our participants also had additional conditions like neurodiversity, being from a racial minority, having caring responsibilities also came across as a factor, as a disadvantaging factor, of course, and more. So if we can move to the final slide, please. And I'll wrap up very quickly now to stay on track with time. So really, we wanted to propose some practical changes to adopt, and really the broader suggestion is to kind of like make all the invisible labor visible by recognizing it in workload and promotion criteria. It's recognition of gendered workload as either alternative promotion criteria or something that need to be considered in terms of kind of like a more equitable workload in future. And if I move on to accumulating effect of intersectionality, then it's something that again needs to be recognized in terms of how additional different intersecting conditions can actually create extreme level of marginalization and how that disadvantages employees. And then structural causes of employees' mental health, so shifting the responsibility back onto the workplace and providing appropriate support. And we suggested some considerations there. And then really, in terms of insufficient support for mentoring and networking, then we really want workplaces to provide that support, and for women, and especially those with intersectional conditions in all career stages. So I'll end up here, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Hadar. Thank you so much. We're going to move on straight away to Fabio. I am going to keep time again, and as you know, Fabio, I'm going to turn up 30 seconds before the end of your time. So please crack on.
Can you see me now? Yes, good. Hello, everyone. My name is Fabio from the University of Surrey, and I'm very excited to tell you about this project that was titled Breaking Barriers in Research Funding Application, where together with my colleagues Anna Firth, Noelia Noel and Susan Hatton, we look at specifically narrative CV. This is a project we have done in collaboration with the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, known as DORA, and the Daphne Jackson Trust. Then we go to the next slide. Yep, so a bit about the project. We have three main aims. The first one was to identify barriers and facilitators of researchers applying for funding. And we did 20 interviews with researchers from underrepresented backgrounds at different career stages. And we focus on the overall barriers when they write an application, but there was a specific part on narrative CVs. So half of our participants did have an experience on writing narrative CVs, whereas the rest did not. So the barriers were specifically focusing on individual barriers, and something that has emerged and was relevant for our project was about language. And it's not about language as people having, for example, English as the second language, but how to communicate specific achievements in a specific way that is perceived successfully. So, and then external barriers were more referring to funders, and one of the main points that emerged was this mistrust in how reviewers might evaluate narrative CVs. Because language was really important, part of our project was focusing on examining the language that people use when they write narrative CVs. So we collected 27 CVs. They were then evaluated by 50 reviewers. So we look at different linguistic features, specifically one around like language related to leadership and language that emphasize achievement. That's what we usually call the agency kind of language. We're able to identify differences in how researchers from different underrepresented backgrounds might differ in the language they were using in their CVs, but also to see the association between specific features of the language and how reviewers evaluated the CV. So once we gather all this kind of knowledge, we got together a very nice group of people. So we had 14 people attending one of our workshops that were people from underrepresented researchers themselves, people who are from professional service delivering training on narrative CVs. We had representatives from different funders, and also we have some experts who are running projects on narrative CVs. So together we're trying to identify what things can be done to address some of the barriers and some of the difficulties that researchers experiences. And so we came up with three main recommendations. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that the first one was a need to have a single resource hub where information and resources to write narrative CV is provided. So this was specifically a recommendation for funders, because researchers mentioned that when they look for information that might be available in their university or institution, but not all the university institution might have the same level of support. So when researchers start to look outside on the internet, very often information is scattered around the web. So having a resource hub that is evolving and provide information on how to write a CV, how the CV is evaluated by reviewers, and also like maybe input for the different projects on narrative CVs will be particularly useful. The second recommendation is aligned to this one and is about the transparency. As I mentioned before, researchers felt that it's not really clear how reviewers are trained and guided in evaluating those CVs. So there was a clear emphasis on making this very transparent to applicants. And by doing that, it will be particularly useful to people who deliver training to then provide information about how the CV needs to be written, but also how it is evaluated by reviewers later on. So this second recommendation is useful for funders because that will increase the trust in the process, but also for institutions who can provide a bit more guidance on what happens after someone submits a CV. And the final recommendation was specifically for institutions because our participants clearly mentioned the need of opportunities to get support. So that could be via mentoring, but we know that not all institutions can provide that. So having also self-reflection tools will be particularly useful. Why is that? Because the narrative CV asks all researchers to think about achievements beyond the traditional things we do in terms of publication, grants, etc. So having opportunity to talk about like the other achievements helps researchers to think how they can then communicate this in their CV. And so that's something that in the workshop came up as particularly important and valuable. And that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Fabio. Wonderful, and just on time. That's what we like to see. Let's move on to Dulini. I'll give you the floor. Thank you. Dulini, do you want to?
Yeah, I am trying to on my video, but
I might need to do it. 1 second.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much. So our study in a collaboration, it's a collaboration between the University of Aston, Brunel, and Manchester Metropolitan University. So my colleagues, Elena Melio and Crystal Wilkinson, were also part of this project. So the three of us undertook a study on the work and career experiences of women who identified with mental health issues in STEM research and innovation. So if you could move to the next slide. So what we did was we conducted one-to-one in-depth interviews with 30 women in various STEM research and innovation roles in both academia and industry. So the interviews ranged from 50 to 90 minutes. Most of them were around 90 minutes, to be honest. The aim of our study was to understand the lived experiences of mental health issues and, how these were navigated by women. So the data we collected, provided insights into how mental health issues were inscribed in the occupational context that people operated in, and how they were inextricably linked to ideal work norms, which prescribed or expected people to devote extremely long hours and achieve tangible, very ambitious targets in order to progress their careers. So most women were, very keen to progress their careers and, in the process of navigating ideal work norms in STEM, research and innovation, and, obviously challenging gendered work cultures. Mental health issues were either triggered or existing mental health issues were exacerbated. So our findings also provided insights into perceptions of support structures, what kind of support that people found incredibly helpful and what support was not as helpful. As I said, the strategies that women adopted to navigate their careers amid mental health issues and the career implications of these. All right. So one of our key findings was really on the incompatibility between these ideal work expectations in STEM, which we call it disembodied, because it just it seems to imply that people are bodiless or mindless individuals, and the experience of mental health, the experience of mental health issues, and ideal work norms in STEM research and innovation. So we found, I think I'd like to draw attention to 4 strategies, particularly 4 strategies that women, undertook to navigate their careers amid mental health issues, and how they, in the process, right, how they contributed to upholding these ideal work expectations, right? So they did very little to challenge institutionalized structures and cultural expectations in their context. On the contrary, I mean, in order to maintain their careers, they contributed to working even harder and contributed to upholding these ideal work expectations, which shaped their experiences of mental health issues. So based on our findings, we provided a set of evidence-based guidelines for employers on how to support the careers of women who experience mental health issues in STEM research and innovation, and guidelines for employees on how to navigate their careers in the midst of mental health issues. We prepared a manual of career stories with 8 of the most represented cases, and a case study on women and mental health issues in gendered workplaces. So we worked very closely with an advisory board and partner organizations from the very inception of the project, and we are continuing to do so to try to disseminate the findings of the study and identify pathways to impact, right? So the next slide, please. So just a couple of, with regard to what practical changes could organizations adopt, I've chosen a couple of things which, appeared very pertinent to our study. So our findings showed, how long-standing ideal work expectations, right, which prescribe long hours and high performance expectations contribute to triggering mental health issues for women, right? And these were, normalized, and they were, embodied by women who, understood these as a natural. Although many organizations are addressing diversity, inclusion, and mental health, right, these disembodied features, ideal worker expectations, continue to be normalized, internalized, and perpetuated within work settings. So from this perspective, we say that organizational policymakers should reflect on the triggers of mental health issues and see if these can be addressed via workplace cultural changes. For example, by educating staff about the implications for well-being in the workplace, right? And then a study also found that many women were reluctant to disclose mental health issues within the workplace, especially when they were in early career, because they felt that they would be stigmatized for it and disadvantaged in career terms, right? So although the COVID pandemic has increased conversation around mental health issues and people acknowledge this, the idea that associations with mental health issues conflict with being seen as an ideal worker and, being seen with who has potential to progress a career in STEM remain entrenched. So from this perspective, again, we feel that organizational policymakers and career managers must take steps to foster cultural change, to challenge and transform the normative assumptions and beliefs that govern STEM workplaces, right? Such actions will ensure that women are not denied career opportunities due to mental health issues, right? And again, this can be done through training and education campaigns that aim to challenge negative stereotypes and make available a broad array of career opportunities to suit the diverse needs and circumstances of employees, right? Then we also suggest that male and female senior personnel can be encouraged to talk more openly about their genuine experiences of mental health issues within the workplace, right? While we recognize that mental health issues are one of, some of the most stigmatized health conditions, our findings suggest that well-established careerists, right, with professional seniority can leverage their experiences of mental health issues to contribute to altering dominant ideal worker discourse in STEM, while safeguarding themselves to some extent from stigmatizing connotations attached to mental health, right? Finally, because we found that mobilizing formal and informal support structures were extremely helpful for individuals to align their, mind-body needs with, work in STEM. We suggest that organizations could especially offer more institutionalized support schemes for mental health difficulties for all of their employees, especially, employee resource groups were found particularly useful by women, right?
Thanks, Dulini. Wonderful. Right, let's move straight away to our next speaker. Nathaniel, please take it away.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Nathaniel Jones from the Centre for Equality Research and Brain Science at UCL. And I'm presenting a project entitled REPAIR, so Redesigned Equitable Processes for Inclusive Research Funding. This is a collaborative study, basically focused on structural inequalities in the way research funding is awarded, but specifically looking at sort of mapping out and understanding the current internal funding application processes and decision-making to identify where these problems might pop up. So essentially our efforts can be divided into kind of two levels of investigation. It's quite a broad project. So first, we're looking at investigating the internal structure of the funding selection process. So part of this has involved collaboration with facilitators and coordinators at our research coordination offices, with whom we've developed this sort of equity and inclusivity checklist, which is essentially a tool to assess and investigate current internal funding calls. And we're also launching a sort of a social network analysis soon to investigate patterns of nomination. And then we're looking at the lived experiences of researchers in navigating the funding process, making applications, receiving feedback, that kind of thing. So we've launched a national and internal survey of sort of experiences and perceptions in research funding applications. And we're also conducting interviews with survey respondents to really explore at a deeper level how they kind of understand, navigate, and experience this internal research funding application process. Next slide, please. Yeah, great. So through these different avenues, we've been able to identify kind of 4 key themes, each of which contains some different changes we think can make quite an impact on improving kind of research funding. The first actually echoes some of the themes of Fabio's project, interestingly. So making an application for funding requires a lot of very specific knowledge, writing conventions, formatting, costing and finance. But lots of participants reported, and we found that when it came to internally managed calls, this guidance is rarely available alongside the call itself. Also, things like selection criteria can also be very sort of opaque and hard to find. And providing this guidance could be really impactful for sort of first-time or early career applicants. But we also found that improving access to knowledge and resources could benefit the level of internal funding call management, particularly when it came to accessibility. So a collaboration with the research officers really illuminated how having guidance on accessibility requirements, for example, could reduce the burden on staff to implement changes that might otherwise take a lot of time and outside expertise. So this could include making documents sort of web accessible, avoiding jargon and exclusionary language, ensuring there are reasonable adjustments. And a big theme that came up was consideration of deadlines, avoiding tight deadlines or deadlines during religious or school holidays, was reported by participants to be really key to reducing the barrier for those with high teaching loads, care responsibilities, that kind of thing. And next, we saw kind of key gaps in support between applicants, sometimes by things like faculty or institution. So participants sort of suggested having more readily available internal support, but also help navigating where to go to for support. Because often these are quite, especially for early career applicants, quite difficult, be quite opaque departments to navigate at first. And adopting the aforementioned changes in resource and accessibility could relieve some of the burden to allow support to be given. But other areas of gaps in support were mental health support as well. Lots of participants reported not feeling there's necessarily adequate support, or reported a real toll on their mental health by making long applications, rejections, and sort of precariousness around contracts and things like that. Another key area was mentorship support. One of the most important factors lots of participants reported was having a mentor to guide them through applications. So encouraging faculties to make mentorship programs available could be really key. And then finally, another similarity with Fabio's project actually is around transparency. So the decision-making process involved in internal pre-selection and selection is often very opaque, rarely including details around panel composition, scoring system, or just receiving feedback that doesn't necessarily feel relevant to applications. So some key changes that were suggested to us would be things like publishing scoring criteria, having early career researchers as observers and review panels, and including detailed feedback on each section of the application. And we think these could be really key to sort of demystifying the decision-making process and sort of, encouraging researchers along their careers. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nathaniel. That was great. Okay, wonderful. Let's move on to our final speaker, Beldina. Thank you.
So hello everyone, I'm Beldina Owalla. I'm based at Oxford Brookes University, and I was the lead for this project that was focused on understanding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the career life cycle of early career academics. Next slide, please. It was an 18-month co-design project that I was running together with the colleagues Elvis Nyanzo and Tim Woolley, based at Oxford Brookes University. And also it was run in partnership with the British Academy of Management. And we also had an advisory group comprising academics from different universities who were part of the project implementation. So our research context was based on the existing social inequalities in higher education institutions that significantly impact the career life cycle and progression of marginalized groups. And given that there was sort of existing gaps in knowledge concerning the gendered and racialized experiences of early career academics, we focused on providing a more comprehensive understanding of that impact with a focus on marginalized groups that included women and ethnic minority early career academics. So the project had three primary objectives. One was to examine the impact of the pandemic on career pathways and progression of early career academics. We're also trying to understand how institutional leaders and researcher managers could better support or supported early career academics. And then lastly, develop recommendations on best practices to create a more inclusive research and innovation environment. So we adopted a mixed methods approach that included both online surveys and semi-structured interviews with the early career academics and business school leaders. And we adopted an intersectional perspective in our analysis and looked at issues around workload, teaching and research productivity, well-being, career development and aspirations, as well as perceptions of support received or provided in the case of business school leaders. So next slide, please. So based on our findings, some of the practical changes that we propose are, first of all, we found that the pandemic exacerbated existing inequalities based on gender, ethnicity, caring responsibilities, the type of contract, and competing inequalities. And the other point was that most of the good practice was more often driven individually rather than at the institutional level. And therefore, one sort of change that we recommend is the need to standardize these existing pockets of good practice to ensure more equitable access to early career academics, but to academics in general. The second point was that there is, we found that there is the need to equip and empower line managers who played a critical role in providing support and mentorship to early career academics, but were equally stretched in terms of having to meet unexpected and conflicting expectations, and that then had an impact on how effectively they were able to perform that role. So this is something that we feel would need to be addressed. Then the third sort of recommendation was the need to provide an environment where early career academics feel safe and empowered to share their experiences and to voice their opinions, and also ensuring that they are well represented at multiple decision-making working groups to improve their visibility and voice in that decision-making process. And then fourthly, also, given that the ECAs, we found that they had changing attitudes to work and career aspirations. with shifting perceptions on, for example, what academic success looks like, the importance of collegiality, and general prioritization of overall well-being. There is a need for broad systemic change in existing practices, policies, and overall organizational culture. And then lastly, given the limited resilience that existed to deal with the crisis, there's a need to develop institutional resilience by building a resilient culture, both at institution and individual level, to better develop ECA's capability in dealing with rising expectations and the constant crisis that the academic sector faces. So thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Beldina. Excellent. Okay, we've got just under 20 minutes for Q&A, and we have a bunch of questions already in the in the box there. If all our speakers, if they're happy to, please put your cameras on so we can see you when you answer some of these questions. We'll start from the top. We had one from Nikki for Dr. Elraz. Hadar, can you see the Q&A button down there? Yeah, great.
Yeah,
So
I've seen it. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that.
Could you read it out, like, or answer like?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll read it out as well. So the question was, while not asked in the call, was there any analysis of the different types of mental health conditions with the 95%? Indeed, yes. So I'll give you an overview now. So we had let me just find it again. Yeah, there we go. We had 3/4 of the participants, so 75%, identified with conditions such as anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and on top of that, so some of them had more than one condition. At least half identified as having depression and low mood. And then the remaining had conditions, so that was the less frequent found in the cohort, such as PTSD and OCD. So these were less frequent conditions. And I'll just to give you a bit more on the data. 53 out of our 60 participants in the interviews also disclosed additional conditions, such as caring responsibilities, so caring for children, we had 20, caring for disabled partners and elderly parents, 7 of those, autism, 14, other neurodiverse conditions, 17, and then physical disability or health conditions, also 17. So I'll pause here.
Thanks so much. Very thorough. Okay, second question was for Fabio. Fabio, can you see that question? I'll read it out for everyone's benefit. We know that there's research in traditional CV review that shows favor bias for men, oftentimes arising from the different linguistic choices used to emphasize leadership and expertise. I'm wondering if you have any insights in terms of whether or not this is still a consideration when it comes to narrative CVs.
Yes, so interestingly, in our study, so we have a very small sample of CVs, so we need to keep this in consideration. But actually, in our study, researchers who identify as women were more likely to use an agentic language and a cause-effect language. So they were actually emphasizing the achievements more than researchers identifying as men. Something I haven't mentioned is that we also check whether those researchers receive feedback before submitting their application. And we know that people who receive feedback actually then are evaluated better by the reviewers. So we need to think that we need to take that in consideration. So it might be that women in our sample might have received the feedback from their institution, the support, and that might have led to in a more agentic way. But watch this space, because I know a colleague from Cambridge and also colleagues in the Netherlands who have a bigger pool of narrative CVs are going to do some linguistic analysis informed by our project. So we'll be able to have a more conclusive answers hopefully soon.
Great, thank you. The next question we had was for Nathaniel. So it's on the Equitable Funding project. I wondered if they explored demand management as part of their internal funding review. This has arisen as a key area requiring focus for external funding. So I wondered if that was also the case internally.
Yeah, that's a nice question. It's not something we actually explored extensively as like an explicit part of the project. although whilst we were like reviewing internally managed calls and comparing them to a lot of the external funding calls, it became pretty clear that at least for UCL, a lot of the funding funding calls there, or the projects, were a lot more specific in scope than the much larger externally funded calls. So they might be kind of targeted at kind of research of a specific career stage, or much more kind of targeted in what sort of research they were looking to fund. So it seems like, that perhaps it wasn't, and in our discussions with research coordination officers, they kind of describe that as a way to really kind of hone down on certain groups of researchers. We are focusing quite a bit currently in our interviews on the internal sort of pre-selection or triage stage that institutions do, where when selecting candidates for external funding, which I suppose is a really key part of kind of demand management for external funds. So hopefully that's something we'll have some kind of quite specific results on soon, at least how internal institutions are internally involved in demand management for larger external funds.
Thanks, Nathaniel. There's a question for Beldina. I don't know if you've seen that in the Q&A there, Beldina, which is, was your research specifically exploring the experiences of business ECAs? I assume that means the discipline business, but I'm good to clarify. And also, what was your definition of ECA?
So thanks for that question. So we did focus on, we were looking at institutions within the UK with a specific focus, I guess, on the business schools. And in terms of defining early career academics, we had a broad definition where we were looking at those who had started the process. So it included PhD students as well, and up to within 10 years of completing the PhD. So that was regardless of title. So typically in our sample, we had postdoctoral researchers, research fellows, lecturers, and senior lecturers within the participants. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question for Dulini's presentation, or for Dulini, which comes from Matter. So that's, given that senior staff sharing their own experiences can help shift norms, how might institutions encourage this without placing emotional labor or vulnerability expectations?
Right. It's a bit of a difficult question. I think in our study, what we discovered is there were some individuals who had, made very significant inroads in their career. There's significant progression in the career, and they were, very willing to act as, change makers, and they were like very open, very willing to share all their experiences. So I would suggest that perhaps, you could work in collaboration with a few such individuals, and also more when in training line managers, etc. You could encourage people, if willing, without placing any, expectations on anybody, or to that, make them aware that, maybe if they choose to do it, that sharing with, on a one-to-one basis, or sharing, it could help others, that it could, it would be a important part of, the institutional cultural change in destigmatizing mental health issues. And I mean, obviously, you could start with a few people who have already, who are willing to come to the floor, create more spaces like employee resource group, women's groups, and things like that, where people can, share, in different ways, if in more safer spaces, if they feel possible. And I think one of the most things is that it is up to the institution to, sort of give the message to people, signal that sharing would not lead to, it would be a safe space to share, right? And that would that's a very complicated thing of how you signal that it is a safe space. I mean, they could be through cultural symbols and through leadership by example, to various means that you say that it will, you encourage people to share on a basis that it'll be a safe space to share. Right.
Thanks, Dulini. If I just kind of follow up with a question I had for you myself, it's just I thought it was really interesting. He talked about how the strategies used by women in these workspaces often upheld the ideal, the ideal disembodied worker image. I wondered if you could go into some detail as to how that kind of happened, and what were those strategies which ultimately had that kind of perhaps unintended effect.
Okay, so I think one of the key, I would just explain it in lay terms. People continued to work quite intensively, despite amid mental health issues, or even when they returned back to work after, let's say, after some time, to recuperate from mental health issues, they continue. Most people, especially early and mid-careerists, they continue to sort of like prove themselves even more. That the time off hadn't, had any effect on their dedication towards work and everything. So they were overperforming to almost, compensate or to overcompensate for that little bit of time off. And, so they would disclose mental health issues if it's absolutely necessary, and continue to plunge through work and career. So I think that was one of the key things that people did. Whereas, I mean, there were some individuals, when they really needed to preempt, they would, sort of preempt work situations that would trigger it. But on the whole, already most early and mid-careerists, continued this pattern of work. Right. So I think that was the strategy of trying to, so almost prove to the organization that they're working even harder. And I mean, issues like anxiety, for example, it was, people were anxious. Obviously, it seemed like one of these double-edged swords, really, that, they were even becoming even more dedicated careerists, and even better performers in the process of experiencing mental health issues, and, overworking themselves and getting
Yeah, I suppose it's the nature of the beast. If there is an ideal worker type, that is that's a kind of attractor pole for anyone who even if they don't fit that ideal worker type for kind of in the workplace, it has that kind of disciplinary pressure.
Yeah, just sorry. No, we're short of time. I'll just quickly to say that the ideal worker type came really strongly, perhaps unsurprisingly, also in the research that we carried out as well. And just to add on all the insights that Dulini shared just now, there's also this kind of like impression from the participants that in order to survive in contemporary academia, right? Redundancies, high competitiveness, etc. We know the score. I think hopefully everybody in the room knows the score, even if you are policymakers. And they kind of like engaged with additional mechanisms to thrive in the workplace. And Dulini already kind of like explained what these some of what these may have been. But just to add on that, so it was kind of like predominantly working around the clock, or alternatively doing a lot more when you're very, very well, to kind of like compensate for periods when you might be unwell. Now, our participants, most of them did not disclose their condition to the workplace. So there was and that was another aspect coming from kind of like fear of being seen as the weakest link. So they worked with their own strategy, kind of like heavily masking, disengaging as much as they could from social events, so they don't need to talk about their personal lives, right? Because their personal lives also don't live up to what is ideal. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add a bit on that, and I'll stop here.
No, thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks for both your contributions there. I saw that Fabio's actually answered the question I was going to ask. So thanks for doing that, Fabio, in the chat. That's great because we've only got 6 minutes left. So let me go back to some of the other questions. I mean, Hadar, actually, maybe do you want to pick up just there's a question at the very, oh, actually, maybe that's been answered as well. Sorry. Oh, no, there is one. How can institutions embed the recognition of invisible labor? This is a question I had as well. Invisible labor is often partly why it can get marginalized and become invisibilized is because it seems like there's some kind of almost structural disposition to relying on it, but also not acknowledging it. So how do we actually bring that into the limelight?
It's a very good question. So thank you for asking. Thank you for the person who raised that. So my impression is it's not there is no wonder wound, and there is no we won't be able to do it like instantly, and it's gonna probably be carried out in a number of stages. Stage one is acknowledging there is invisible labor happening. Stage two, perhaps accommodating for some of this currently what is invisible to make it visible in workloads. Stage three is potentially to also, or maybe equally with stage two, to provide a promotion criteria or recognition in promotion for this what is currently is invisible labor and unrecognized labor. So it would have to be in stages, but at the moment we are in stage 0 where it is invisible. So we have to kind of like transform it to a visible state.
Thank you. Okay, we still have a bunch of questions left. I wonder, so what I'll do maybe is I'll ask, there's a question from Fiona about to all presenters, which to what extent did you involve and co-produce research questions with research professionals in the research offices themselves? I know a lot of the co-research is done with, let's say, I mean, to use the term shop floor kind of research staff, but to what extent is it done with research offices? And while whoever wants to pick that up, please just jump in, but there are other questions in there. If it's directed at your presentation, maybe if you're not answering this question, if you wouldn't mind typing an answer, that'd be great. Who wants to jump in on this one?
I can start if you want. So before submitting the proposal to EDICa, we had a chat with the research office in our institution because we know that at the moment there is not much support because of like restructuring and stuff like that. So there are less people providing specific support about narrative CV. So we kind of like had a chat with them, and then we involved research professional in the process. They help us recruiting participants as well, and then in the final workshop they were invited to bring their own point of view. So the kind of recommendation I presented, they were co-created with the research office representatives as well.
Just to say,
go on, please.
We had obviously the research office accompanying us throughout the application process, and then we, in the focus groups, we invited impact leads and colleagues in research offices across the UK to provide a steer on the findings as well.
In our case, we involved the research professional that were helping us with the initial reviewing the initial proposal before it went out to EDICa. But for our project, I would say we dealt more with the research managers who were providing support to the early career academics. So that was, they had more input, I would say, within our project. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm going to just jump. Thank you guys for all that. And I'm going to jump to the final question, perhaps, which will, Nathaniel, I don't know if you clocked it, Nikki Wilson's question. I wonder if you know of any research focused on the impact of the choice of lead researcher on funded decisions, e.g. thinking that if there's a shift in demand management to ensure equitable opportunities to apply, this can only really be impactful if potential bias in funding decisions is also addressed.
Yeah, that's a really nice question. I'm afraid I don't know of any research that's addressed that question specifically. I mean, the projects like ours, looking at sort of, yeah, specifically, yeah, it's not quite a recent thing. I mean, I'm just thinking about whether that's something we could really pick apart with some of our survey data, whether like, yeah, respondents were PIs, and then you kind of using their characteristics to see whether that affected their success. But sorry, I wish I could. I'm definitely going to go away and try and find some research on that, because that sounds pretty a pretty integral part of the questions. Yeah, especially as demand management is becoming more important and being considered by sort of external and internal funders more and more.
Great, thank you. We're just at time, so I want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers. Thanks so much for those insights, and broadly we kept to time, so that was very great. And thanks for the questions. Lots of those coming in. The next session, if you want to head back to the main room, if you're there in person, or there's a kind of remote option as well. Join us again at 1:15. Next session will be why the EDI caucus matters and what will UKRI do differently as a result, with a keynote from Professor Christopher Smith. Please use the main Zoom link for that session. So thanks for kind of dipping into this one. Head back to the main room in an hour's time. So thank you very much. Cheers, guys.